Srila Prabhupada always thought that. So we'll start off with the Mangala Charan and prayers, and then we will go into the discussion of today's class, of today's session. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatha Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaisnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutan Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutidevi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubheva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vashadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Vishnupadaya, Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale, Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine, Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pracharine, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi, Paschachati Shatarine. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to today's session. It's still our Chat Plus session, but in the build-up to Shri Gaur Purnima, we've decided that we will structure a series of classes that will help us in our remembrance and observance for the upcoming Shri Gaur Purnima festival. In the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, the Gaur Purnima festival is one of the most important. We are called Gaudiya Vaishnavas because we are coming in the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, he said, when you go to a kingdom, our main duty and our main focus should be to glorify and recognize the predominant king in that kingdom. We should not go to a kingdom and when we get there, glorify any other kings. That is the etiquette. That is the duty. That is the correct way. So in the same way, the king, the Maharaj, the Ishtadev for this Kali Yuga is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, our devotion, our attention should be focused on Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We should see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Ishtadev because he is the Kali Yuga avatar. He is the avatar for this Kali Yuga. And when we do focus our attention on Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu being the most magnanimous incarnation, the incarnation for this Kali Yuga, all our shortcomings, all our discrepancies, all our lack of qualifications has no place. So it's very important that we all understand. Today I spent some time in the temple. I was at the book table at the Haveli, and I went to the book table in the temple. Then I went to the Golden Avatar exhibition, and I was meeting various people there. And what really caught me by surprise is how many people knew very little, or even some nothing, about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came as Chana avatar, covered incarnation, and there was a particular reason for that. Mahaprabhu came as a devotee, and one cannot simultaneously exhibit oneself as a devotee and as the Lord. He came to teach how a devotee should act, how a devotee should live. So Mahaprabhu covered the aspect of him being Krishna himself. He covered the aspect of him being the avatar. And he exhibited, when anyone used to say, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he used to close his ears and say, no, no, no. So we have structured a series of sessions this week, and we have a very nice schedule. Today we have the historical significance of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And in my presentation, I will cover some points which explains or tells us why it is so relevant and important for us to understand this historical significance. Tomorrow, following on the same theme, but bringing it closer to us in terms of time, we'll cover the miraculous publishing of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And then on Tuesday, we'll have Mukunda Hari Prabhu speaking to us about Vaishnava relationships as seen through the Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. The interaction, Srila Prabhupada used to say, Krishna consciousness is 90% association. So we need to know how to associate with devotees. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, through his own Lila, he showed that perfectly and wonderfully. So we'll have Mukunda Hari Prabhu speaking about that. On Wednesday, we will have Madhukumari Mataji speaking again, another very important and relevant aspect of the Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And that is Grihastha lives and duties as seen through the Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And then on Thursday, we're very fortunate, we have Kartik Chandra Prabhu. And he's going to speak to us how the scriptures, although Mahaprabhu is Chana avatar, is covered, there are many, many clear references in the scriptures which evidence Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then on Friday, which is Gaur Purnima, different devotees were saying, we should not have a session on Friday because many devotees are going to the temple. My view was there are still many devotees who may not be going to the temple, who would very much welcome still getting together and discussing Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance and early pastimes. And I would appreciate it for those who are present today, if you can give me some feedback of whether you feel, you can write it in the chat box, and that'll be a good indicator for me, of whether you feel we should still go ahead on Friday. And if you feel that many of you feel you wouldn't be here because of your attendance at the temple, that'll give us a good perspective of things. So we would welcome that feedback from all of you. And I hope all of you all are eager and enthusiastic for these sessions. I hope you all are in agreement that this is a good thing to do. Although I know we are the Chat Plus and we've come together specifically to read and study Srimad Bhagavatam. but still, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the perfect person Bhagavat. You get the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat. So the once someone asked Srila Prabhupada, which is more important, the book Bhagavat or the person Bhagavat? The book Bhagavat is the 18,000 verses. The person Bhagavat is the living example of Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada looked at the devotee and he said, the person Bhagavat. And the devotee said, why? And Prabhupada said, because he can pull your ears. The person Bhagavat can pull your ears. Meaning that the person Bhagavat is a living example, a living teacher of the book Bhagavat. Of the book of Bhagavat. So yeah, I see many of you all have been writing and many suggestions coming through. We can keep Friday. So I would still welcome the comments by the others. So dear devotees, let's make a start. I'm not sure how long we will go today, but let's go for it. Hare Krishna. Okay. So the historical significance of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. That is our subject for discussion today. What do we hope to cover in this session? So the first thing we'll talk about is why is the subject so important and relevant to us? I wrote what there, but it should be why. And when we understand why it is so important and relevant for us, we'll be more eager to give more attention to the discussion and itself. Secondly, we'll talk about how this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, colors all of our memories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Then we'll speak about the history of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Then we'll speak a bit about the author. And then finally, we'll speak about the impact from different angles of why this book is so significant, so important, not only to us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but to Kali Yuga, to the propagation of real religion in this Kali Yuga. I hope that all sounds appealing and interesting to all of you. So let us proceed. So why is this topic important for us individually? It is important for us both individually and collectively, but for us individually. When we understand the importance of anything, we tend to value it much more. We tend to be more enthusiastic in our connection and relation with that item, subject, person. So by understanding the historical significance, it'll put for us in perspective. Like many of us in our spiritual life, we simply tick along. We do not have any specific goals. We take it day by day. But spiritually, just as important as we have material goals, we need to have spiritual goals. And one very, very important goal. When Prabhupada said, I have only one problem with my followers. And he said, that is, they do not spend sufficient time and attention reading the books that I've spent so much of time and effort to translate for them. All of us should be so eager, so determined, that we should say, I am determined that I will not leave this body until I have read everything that Srila Prabhupada has given us. The Bhagavad Gita, the Nectar of Devotion, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We should all be very eager and like absolutely focused on this. And when we understand the significance of such literature, both for us, then we will be more inclined to take it seriously. Secondly, this is important for us in us understanding our tradition. We come in a very, very, what can I say, royal, important, unique tradition. Srila Prabhupada brought with him not only a movement, he brought with him an entire culture, an entire tradition. And when we understand the tradition, just like, you know, as individuals, when we understand our family traditions, it gives greater significance to who we are. So in the same way as devotees, such topics are important for us to understand our tradition. Thirdly, we will develop greater appreciation of gratitude for what Jyoti Mataji, if you can help me, it becomes a bit distracting for me to mute people. I think as co-host, you have the ability to mute if you can help me mute people. If there's
okay, Prabhuji, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So this principle of gratitude is very important in spiritual life. I always quote His Holiness Radhanath Swami, who was once very nicely expressed, where he said that gratitude is the condition of the heart in which bhakti grows. And having this sense of gratitude to what we've received in the form of Vaishnava literatures is very important for our own spiritual life. And lastly, it will also provide us with a greater sense of why we need to distribute this. This Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition that we come in, it's a tradition coming all the way from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, with the key principle being to distribute. Very, very important is, as devotees, we want to give pleasure to Krishna. And one way that Krishna feels great pleasure is when his lost souls come back to him. It gives Krishna immense pleasure. So in this tradition, this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which teaches selfless devotion to Krishna, a single-pointed focus on wanting to do everything for the pleasure of Krishna. This principle of distribution is extremely important also. And this will also give us a sense of the importance of distribution. So with that in mind, we shall now proceed. So what do I hope to cover in this session? The first one, we said we've finished the first one, why is the subject important and relevant to us? And the second one, how this book colors our memories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But before I do this, I have an admission to make. I am not an historian. I would hardly consider myself a scholar. But I have great interest in studying our tradition in a personal basis. And much of what I'm going to speak today, I've gathered from certain individuals in our movement. So without wanting to superficially seem like what I am presenting is mine, actually, nothing of what I'm presenting today is mine. I'm simply repeating from what I've learned from these great devotees. His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, who's presented a very nice lecture, which you can get on YouTube, the historical importance of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita, or the impact.
Sorry, I didn't find
His Holiness Krishna Kshetras Maharaj, who in one of the sessions, the DBC SPT series on Chaitanya Charitamrita, presented very nicely. His Grace Hari Parshad Prabhu, and also the GBC strategic planning team. which very, very nicely over the years have pulled together various sources and important information and devotee speakers on the subject. So this is what you will receive today. So I want to start off by sharing this one beautiful verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita itself by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he compiled the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in a very advanced stage of his life. It is said that he was in his late 90s or possibly into his early 100s. He says, he writes in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that he's very infirm. His eyesight is not very good. And due to age, he feels inhibited. But still, he has attempted to write the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And there's times in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that he describes early on the later pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he says he never knew when or if he'll be able to finish the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that's why it's written like that. So when he did finish the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in the early 16th century, he was extremely happy, very joyful he felt. And tomorrow we will speak about also how Srila Prabhupada also felt in a very similar way when he finished his translation into English of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And in the, I think it's, I don't know, I got a reference, it's Adi Lila 12.1 or Anti Lila. But anyway, the verse is correct. Shruyatam, Shruyatam, Nityam, Giyatam, Giyatam, Mudha, Chinyatam, Chinyatam, Bhaktas, Chaitanya Charitamrita. O devotees, may the transcendental life and characteristics of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always be heard, chanted, and meditated upon with great happiness. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he so beautifully says to all of the readers that may this transcendental life and characteristics of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, may you always hear it, chant it, and meditate upon it with great happiness. So this is what Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wanted to leave as his legacy for the residents of this Kali Yuga. And this literature, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is so important in our tradition that practically all of the memories that we have of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are associated with this literature. When we think of the Ganges, when we think of Sri Navadvip, when we think of Sri Jagannath Puri, irrespective of where we are, where we're situated in the world, our minds can see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What to speak when we actually go there? When we go to Jagannath Puri, we will think about how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fainted in front of the Jagannath deity, how he expressed deep emotions. When we see the Ganges, when we walk on the beach of Jagannath Puri, we look at the sand dunes, we'll think about how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw the dunes as Govardhan Hill, how we saw the ocean as the Yamuna. So practically speaking, in our tradition, all of our memories, or practically most of our memories, is based on this literature, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Therefore, this is the primary literature for so many devotees relishing the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And from an historical perspective, this book, it was composed at exactly the right time, historically. And we shall discuss why this is so. Why this is so. Dear devotees, I'm not sure how to best conduct this class, but if at any point in time you you have a comment, or maybe you have a question you want to, because we cover many slides here. For a particular time, you can raise your hand, or you can write a question on the chat. And again, Jyoti Mataji, I may not be so focused on the chat. If you see any questions, then please feel to interrupt me and maybe raise it.
Okay, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So let's just talk about historically, what happened after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's departure. We understand that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself, who came in the mood of Srimati Radharani to teach what is Krishna Bhakti. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to establish the Yuga Dharma. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to liberate all of the residents of this Kali Yuga. So Mahaprabhu was on this planet for roughly 48 years. And Mahaprabhu, if there's different historical dates, but the general consensus seems to be that Mahaprabhu left this planet. He departed from our physical presence on the 29th of June, 1533, 16th century. But when Mahaprabhu left, he did not leave any institution. It's like Prabhupada has left us, but he's left ISKCON, an institution, to take forward his legacy. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had no particular institution. So therefore he left no institution. Mahaprabhu personally only gave us the 8 verses, Shishashtakam. There was no other personal writings of Mahaprabhu. He instructed the duty of all of the writings to his followers, mainly the 6 Goswamis. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left no successor to take forward this movement after his departure. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left no personal instructions on how his movement should continue after he departed. So in one sense, that is a huge void. Huge void. Because while Mahaprabhu was present, everything was focused on Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu was the life and soul of his devotees, of anyone who he came in contact with. So historically, in terms of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, what happened after 1533? And this is what we shall discuss, because where we are at the moment, we are, want to say, well, wonderful better word, we are products, or we are outcomes of what happened after that. So it is said there is 2 types of association, both with the Lord and the spiritual master. One type of association is Vapu, the physical association, the physical presence. And the second type of association is Vani, meaning the instructions. In our tradition, or in practically all traditions, the association of Vani is more important, the instructions. And Srila Prabhupada expressed that very nicely. He said, I will never leave. I will always be present in the form of my books. He reasons hill who say that Vaishnavas die. For Vaishnavas do not die, but they live in sound. This is what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said. So there were some biographies that were started and completed during Mahaprabhu's presence, but the bulk of his biographies is instructions, is Vani. They were contained in 25 biographies. The other day I was listening to Sutpa Prabhu, and he was saying, have we ever heard of any personality who had 25 biographies written about them. So in terms of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there were, at least on record, were 25 biographies of Mahaprabhu. And many, practically all of them were written prior to Sri Chaitanya Charita, the writing of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And I'll just talk about roughly some of the most significant biographies. The first one, which I mentioned in the slide, is Murari Gupta's Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Caritamrita. He called it Krishna Chaitanya Caritamrita. So Murari Gupta, we understand from Chaitanya Caritamrita itself, he was a physician. He was an incarnation of Hanuman in GAURA Lila. And Murari Gupta, he kept very detailed diaries of Mahaprabhu's activities. He was a close associate living close to Mahaprabhu, and he kept detailed diaries. So based on those diaries, he wrote Krishna Chaitanya Caritamrita in 1514 AD. And you can see if Mahaprabhu departed in 1533, how that fits into that context. The second significant biography of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was written by Sri Kavi Karnapur. Sri Kavi Karnapur, he was considered to be a genius, a master in all aspects of Vedic literature, Sanskrit literature. And in Chaitanya Caritamrita, it's explained how Kavi Karnapur, he was the son of Shivananda Sen. And when he was a baby, one day he went and sucked Mahaprabhu's toe. And Mahaprabhu allowed him to suck his toe. And Sri Kavi Karnapur, in terms of our Gaudiya Vaishnava literature, he was a great poet. And he wrote many literatures, many great literatures. But in terms of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the two literatures he wrote were Sri Chaitanya Charita Mahakavya, which was written in 1543, after the departure of Mahaprabhu. And then he also wrote a drama about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. A drama is called Nataka, called Chaitanya Chandra Nataka. And he wrote that 10 years later after he wrote Chaitanya Charita Mahakavya. And that was published he wrote in 1553 AD. And that both works were in Sanskrit. And then the third significant biography was written by the Vyasadeva of Chaitanya Lila. And who was the Vyasadeva of Chaitanya Lila? It was Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur. And very humbly, Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, in the Adi Lila 8th chapter 34 verse, he writes, as Vyasadeva has compiled all the pastimes of Lord Krishna in Srimad Bhagavatam, Thakur Vrindavan Das has depicted the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. And this book, Chaitanya Bhagavat, it is accessible these days, even in audio, was a beautiful book. And the Vyasadeva of GAURA Lila, he wrote this book. And this book, Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, it was compiled in 1574, so in the late 1500s. Yeah, significant. I'm just muting someone. Yeah, significantly after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then in 1615 AD, Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami compiled what is called his magnum opus, Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. That was compiled many years after Mahaprabhu's disappearance. But it is of great historical significance. So it will be remiss of us not to speak about the greatness of Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So we'll just speak a little bit about who Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is. So he was born in the early 1500s. And when he was very young, at the age of 6 years old, his parents passed away. His father's name was Bhagiratha. He was a Vaidya by profession. And we know Vaidyas, they are called Kaviraj. So Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he was not Kaviraj because of being a son of a Vaidya. The main reason he was Kaviraj was because he was the king of all poets. Raj means king, Kavi means poet. So he was the king of all poets. But because at a young age, due to losing his parents, he developed an intense sense of renunciation in his heart. And there was a point in life, he had a brother called Shyamdas. He was mentioned, he was born in 1507. And his brother and himself, Shyamdas, they were raised by maternal uncles of them. But there was a very significant incident that took place at one stage. Miniketan Ramdas, who was an associate of Lord Nityananda, he came to the residence where Shyamdas and Krishnadas used to live. Shyamdas accepted Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he never accepted Lord Nityananda. With the result, he never recognized Lord Nityananda's very intimate disciple, Miniketan Ramdas. And Kaviraj Krishnadas was very unhappy, because we know that anyone who claims to be a follower of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu without being a follower of Lord Nityananda, they are known to be bogus. They are fake, because it's not possible to be a follower of Lord Chaitanya without being a follower of Lord Nityananda. So his brother Shyamdas, he didn't recognize Lord Nityananda, and this made Krishnadas extremely unhappy, to the point that he rebuked his brother, chastised his brother, and felt like he never wanted to continue any further relationship with his brother. And in the same night that this incident took place, Lord Nityananda came in his dream, and Lord Nityananda told him, Krishnadas, you go to Vrindavan, and in Vrindavan, you will find and realize everything to your full heart's desire. And then Krishnadas, he left for Vrindavan. So he gave all of his possessions to his brother Shyamdas, and he left to Vrindavan. And when he went to Vrindavan, he accepted Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, an intimate follower, one of the 6 Goswamis, as his guru. And he practiced his bhajan in Sri Radhakund, at Sri Radhakund. And actually, if you go to Sri Radhakund today, you can see the samadhi of Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. It is a very, for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, it's a very important place of pilgrimage. And many of you may already have been there. And then his second samadhi is at the Sri Radha Damodar temple. It is said is Siddha Deha. Siddha Deha means his eternal constitutional position in the spiritual world. There are actually 2 accounts of what is Siddha Deha is. One is Ratha Rekha Sakhi, and the other one is Kasturi Manjari. So Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is one of the most important and close associates of Srimati Radharani in the spiritual world, who descended on this planet to be part of GAURA Lila. How's everyone doing? Is everyone with me? I have no idea whether you're bored or you're finding this interesting.
Wonderful.
Hari Bol.
Very
It's
interesting, Prabhuji.
Very interesting, Prabhuji.
Very
Oh.
interesting.
Okay, you are there and you're still attentive. Thank you. It's difficult when you do this.
Very interesting, Prabhu.
Hare
Very,
Krishna.
very nice. Very interesting. Thank you.
When we do this remotely, it says 90% of communication is non-verbal. So anyway, moving on. So Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he left teen amrita, means he left 3 pots of nectar for us. And the 3 pots of nectar relate to the literature. The first literature is Govinda Lila, which is a book of unparalleled literature, mastery in poetry, and in terms of content about the pastimes and activities of the Lord. Actually, this book is so advanced that Sri Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada advised his devotees not to read Govinda Lilamrita till they finished, all of the other Vaishnava literatures. The second book he wrote, Pot of Nectar he gave us, was his commentary on Sri Krishna Karnamrita, which was a book written by Srila Bilva Mangal Thakur. It was a book that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was extremely, extremely fond of, and he would ask the devotees to read about him. And lastly, he wrote a Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which was his magnum opus, 11,519 verses. The final word, the best Bengali sweet, the crown jewel of all Vaishnava literatures, the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. He left that for us. So, as we discussed previously, all of these other biographies, or most of these other biographies, they were written in Sanskrit language. But Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is written in Bengali. And there are some very interesting reasons why he selected Bengali to write Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And it's important to understand. And many people ask the question, he was so expert in Sanskrit, absolutely expert, the topmost Sanskrit writer, a kavi. But he chose to write Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali. Why? And the first and a very important reason was he wanted to reach out to the masses. Mahaprabhu's mission was to reach out to the masses. Mahaprabhu once predicted that his name will be heard in every town and village. And Sanskrit is not a language for the masses. Sanskrit could be a difficult language. Sometimes it's said it could take up to 10 years simply to learn the proper Sanskrit grammar. And this Sanskrit, it is only known by, relatively speaking, very few Brahmins. But Bengali is more easily accessible. It's easier to study. It's easier to understand. Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, there'll come a time where the people of the world will be so eager to learn Bengali simply to appreciate Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita better. That was his prediction. So that was one of the reasons he chose to write in Bengali. And the second and an important reason he chose to do it is because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in Bengal. A lot of his intimate followers came from Bengal. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, so Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he wanted to write a book. He wanted to describe Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastime in the local Bengali language. So why? So why did he compile the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita? Because there were 24 other biographies. The Srila Vyasadeva of Chaitanya Lila had already compiled Chaitanya Bhagavat. And we know it is the Vaishnava tradition, it's the humility of the Vaishnava that they do not cover anything that's already written by other Vaishnavas. Because by doing so, it's almost you making a statement that you have more to offer. You have something better to offer than the predecessor. So why did he compile Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita? It's quite important for us to understand this historically. And that's revealed in 2 verses in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita itself. In Adi Lila, chapter 8, text 71, and the Antya Lila, chapter 20, text 99. So we shall look at that. So in Adi Lila, chapter 8, text 71, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami writes, in Vrindavan, there were also many other great devotees, all of whom desired to hear the last pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So the great devotees of the Lord, they took up residence in Sri Vrindavan now. And Mahaprabhu personally sent them to Vrindavan to write and to excavate the lost places of pastimes of Sri Chaitanya, of Lord Krishna. So these great Vaishnavas, they were residing in Vrindavan. And it was a fact that most of the previous books, even if we read and study Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, those books focus mainly on the earlier and middle pastimes of the Lord. But there's very little or practically nothing written about the later pastimes of the Lord. So one may ask the question then, why are the later pastimes of the Lord so significant? It was because it was during these years in Jagannath Puri that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu displayed his most intimate pastimes. He went into the deepest bhavs in his latter pastimes in Jagannath Puri. And that for devotees to hear about the bhavas, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, which were not described before, they wanted to. So that was one reason that they wanted Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami to write this book. So after getting this inspiration, where the devotees were saying, please, Krishnadas, please write about the later pastimes. One day he went to the temple of Madan Mohan in Vrindavan. And there something very surprising and miraculous happened. What happened there? When he entered the temple, one of the pujaris came and offered him one of the personal garlands of Madan Mohan. It is said in Vaishnava tradition, whenever this happens, whenever a pujari comes and gives us a mala spontaneously, this is called Agnya Mala, which means it's carrying the order of the Lord. Agya means order, and Mala means garland. That means the Lord is ordering us to get that garland. So Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami received, and all of the devotees, as we can see in this photograph, they became ecstatic. They all took this as confirmation that Lord Madan Mohan was wanting to fulfill that desire and wanting Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami to write Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And after this incident, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he took up the writing of this great Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he writes about this further, as I mentioned in the Untitled Lila. He says, Sri Madan Mohan, deity of Vrindavan, has given the order that is making me write. And here he says very nicely that he doesn't feel that he has been writing Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. This Madan Mohan deity is making him write. He said, although this should not be disclosed, I disclose it because I'm unable to remain silent. Just like if we received a very confidential item from the Lord, we don't go and broadcast it, because by broadcasting it, we want to make some sort of proclamation that we are some special devotee who the Lord has chosen to give us some special mercy. So Vaishnavas never broadcast such things. So he says here, although this should not be disclosed, I disclose it because I'm unable to remain silent. But he says, if I did not disclose the fact, I would be guilty of ingratitude to the Lord. Therefore, my dear readers, please do not consider me too proud and be angry at me. It is because I have offered my prayers onto the lotus feet of all of you that whatever I have written about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been possible. So beautifully, so humbly written by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So now coming back to this important point, the impact and the historical significance of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Something is considered to be of historical significance when it is very clear that this event or this act, it changed the course of history. It plays a major part in a shift of a tradition or the direction of events. And we all know Kali Yuga moves only in one direction, towards a darker and darker situation. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srimad Bhagavatam and Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they wanted to push back this tide of Kali. So we shall look in different ways at how this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it changed and it will change the course of history. In one letter to Suchandra Das, written in Bombay on the 1st of January 1972, Srila Prabhupada wrote, he said, I wish that it will be noted down in history that this Krishna consciousness movement is responsible for saving the world. Practically, our movement is the only hope for saving the world from complete disaster. So Srila Prabhupada has made this prediction. And to some extent, we've already seen this come to fruition. It has been predicted that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement will last for 10,000 years in Kali Yuga. So, we're very early into Kali Yuga. It says it'll be like 5,000 years into Kali Yuga. So for the next 10,000 years, this Krishna consciousness movement is going to be the saving grace for Kali Yuga. We've already got some clue of how that will happen, but much more is still to be revealed. And actually, he said that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes are still taking place this very day. This ISKCON movement, Prabhupada said, it is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And we are all currently involved in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. That is categorically stated by Srila Prabhupada. So this Kali Yuga, this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, by spreading the glories of the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the characteristics of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This book, Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita, combined with the Srimad Bhagavatam, will push back Kali Yuga. Now, historically, where does Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fit into the, or we can say, the Vedic canon, the scope of Vedic literature? So this is a very, very wonderful diagram that has been compiled by His Grace Sutapa Prabhu in his book Chaitanya Charitamrita Compact. And in this book, he explains how Bhagavad Gita is a foundational study. It is the words of Krishna, and it explains the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be the graduate study, the activities of Krishna, Krishna Lila, and its content is the character and pastimes of Krishna and his devotees. And then Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's the mind of Krishna. So historically, we had the words of Krishna. Then we had literature describing the activities of Krishna. And then Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita reveals the mind of Krishna. And it explains the process and practice of devotional service. So Bhagavad Gita starts off, it begins off, you are not the body, you are the soul. And it progresses to the final or the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, which is 1866. Sarva dharma parichaja mamekam charanam vraja aham tvam sarva papibhyo mokshasyami masjaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and surrender unto me. I will protect you from all sinful reactions, do not fear. That's where the Bhagavad Gita ends. And where does Srimad Bhagavatam begin? It begins with the second verse, Dharma Projita Kaitavatra, that rejecting all cheating religion and to give the essence of the true religion, this Srimad Bhagavatam propagates the highest truth. That's where Srimad Bhagavatam begins. And where does it end? The very last verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, the very last verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is the 12th canto, 13th chapter, text number 23. And that verse explains that chanting the holy names of Krishna is the means to destroy all sinful reaction. That's where Srimad Bhagavatam ends. And where does Chaitanya Charitamrita start? It starts off by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saying, I will come, I will descend in this Kali Yuga, and I will come to teach the process of chanting and practicing this Harinam Sankirtan myself. And where does it end? It ends in the highest form of Krishna Bhakti. Normally we think that prema is the highest form of Krishna Bhakti. According to the Vaishnava literature, according to the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there are many stages beyond prema of love of God. And the most intense stage of love of God is called Mahabhav. Mahabhav is only demonstrated by Srimati Radharani. And this book ends with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the mood of Srimati Radharani, feeling intense separation, being merged in an ocean of ecstatic love in separation. That's where it ends. So this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it closes the circle. Therefore, one famous scholar, he has said, this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's the final word. It's the final word. It's the limit of all Vedic knowledge. So I'll go through quickly through the other slides, but just give you a little taste for the other ways in which Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is so historically important. From the perspective of interfaith, In Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, we find the most beautiful, enlightening discussions between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Muslims. Firstly, with the Chandkazi, and secondly with the Panthas. I forgot how you pronounce it. Anyway, the Muslim leaders. And I saw a book recently, it's called Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Quran. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has such beautiful discussions explaining where does the Quran stop and why, what goes beyond that. Then he has some very wonderful conversations with the Buddhists, some very nice pastimes, and then with the other Vaishnava Sampradayas. In the 9th chapter of the Madhya Lila, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes to Udupi and he meets the head of the Madhva Sampradaya. And there's some wonderful conversation takes place. He speaks with Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Not Gopal, and how is my memory gone now? Anyway, with the other Vaishnava traditions, he speaks. Then he brings the Vaishnavas, this book brings the Vaishnavas together. So what we had after the departure of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we had Vaishnavas scattered all over the place. Some Vaishnavas in Jagannath Puri, some Vaishnavas in Vrindavan, some Vaishnavas in Bengal. And even in Bengal, there's pockets of Vaishnavas all over the Bengal. And nobody knew how they were connected. And then in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, the 3rd chapter, we read about the tree of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, how there are different branches and the trunks and this branch and that branch. And when all the Vaishnavas received Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, they said, this is how we are connected. We are all one big family. So this book, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, by the descriptions of Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he brought all of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas together. And for the first time, they understood, yes, this is how we are all parts of the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tree. Then in terms of language, writing in the Bengali language and expressing it in such poetic, well, a lot of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, actually, there's significant amount of verses in Sanskrit because Krishna Das Kaviraj, but the bulk of it is Bengali. And Sri Chaitanya, there was a time in writing when English was coming, where it was free verse, there were no meters. And by bringing and writing the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali, he brought a new spirit to the Bengali language. Secondly, also another way historically it's so significant is because falling in the ages, there were many deviations taking place under the name of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his movement. And by listing out the Siddhanta and the true followers, he was indirectly declaring who was authentic followers, and he was preserving the parampara, the lineage of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. How can I miss out the most important? Then, from a point of theology, all of the other books that were written focused only on Leela. There was not much Siddhanta. And for the first time ever, Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami wrote a book not only about the Leela, but also about the Siddhanta of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And by doing this, he preserved Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's legacy in a profound way. We know that was the first wave. There was a first wave, and the followers, Srinivas Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, and Shyamananda Pandit. they took these books, and tomorrow I shall describe what happened to the books. And then in terms of the second revival, there was a second revival approximately 500 years later, when Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur came. When he appeared, there were so many upper sampradayas, the Sahajias, who took Gaudiya Vaishnavism very cheap, who were misrepresenting Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. And when Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur appeared, he was wondering, how will he push back? How will he fight back? And he looked for and he found a copy of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. And when he found that copy of Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita, he had it copied, and he used this Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita to negate. So tattva should always be for Liva. It means the truth of the Lord. Just like in Srimad Bhagavatam, before getting to the 10th canto, we understand the truth of who Lord Krishna is. And then we go into the 10th canto, just so we don't misunderstand. So the tattva aspect is extremely important. So for the first time, Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he brought the tattva aspect. Well, there are some other slides, maybe which I'll just summarize tomorrow, but bearing in mind time, and we normally try to finish at 8:45, I'll stop here for today. I hope you found this useful, dear devotees. I welcome your feedback and comments or any reflections that any of you have. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandava Pranams, Prabhupada. Thank you for a very, very wonderful class. It was really good. I have a slightly related, slightly off-topic question. You mentioned Lord Buddha there as well. Lord Buddha appeared about 2,500 years ago, I think 500 BC or something around that sort of time. So is Lord Buddha considered a Yuga avatar? Because that was technically Kali Yuga. And therefore, in Kali Yuga, I think Lord Chaitanya is supposed to be the Gupta avatar in Yuga avatar in Kali Yuga. So how does Lord Buddha's incarnation fit in with the Yuga avatar compared to Lord Chaitanya's?
So we know there are different types of avatars. You know, there is Guna avatars, there's Lila avatars, there's Manvantar avatars, there's Shakti Avesh avatars, and there's Yuga avatars. So Lord Buddha in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he features under the category of Lila avatars, who came for a specific purpose. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is clearly the Yuga avatar, not only in Srimad Bhagavatam. And on Thursday, when Kartik Chandra Prabhu speaks, we'll hear a bit more about that. So he is Yuga avatar, he is the Yuga avatar, and Lord Buddha is Lila avatar according to Bhagavatam.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
You said that the Bhagavatam and the Chaitanya Charitamrita will push back Kali Yuga. Exactly what does that mean?
It means it will destroy the demoniac mentality of the residents of Kali Yuga. Srimad Bhagavatam, how will it destroy the demonic mentality? It's very clearly explained in the Bhagavatam that simply by giving oral reception to the messages contained in Srimad Bhagavatam, all that is unwanted in the heart gets eradicated. The root cause of all problems in Kali Yuga, be it financial, economical, social, environmental, can all be traced down to one root cause, and that is the condition of people's hearts. Like just one typical example, Vladimir Putin. You know, he's a living entity, he's a part and parcel of Krishna. But his heart has become so contaminated with anarthas that he can do such atrocious things. But if Vladimir Putin ever one day he is able to give oral receptions to Srimad Bhagavatam. All of his demonic mentalities will be eradicated. So that's one way. And the second way, the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita propagates the Yuga Dharma in the chanting of the holy names. And secondly, simply by hearing the Lila, simply by connecting with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, simply by developing a favorable mood towards Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, people will become free. There's so many places in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami writes so many benedictions that people will have simply by hearing Chaitanya Charitamrita. The demonic consciousness, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu doesn't come to kill demons, he comes to kill the demonic consciousness. So these two powerful literatures combined with the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, which is the prime goal mentioned in both literatures, Kali Yuga will be held back and pushed back.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Any other questions, comments, or reflections? Jyoti, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, Prabhuji, there is one question asking that after the session, will we be able to get the slides, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to share this.
Yeah,
with you.
okay. And there is another thing, another question from Vishalini Mataji. I didn't understand the first and second wave.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So after Mahaprabhu left the planet, I was describing, some of the void and the vacuum. So there was a wave, a big wave of the re-establishment of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings and pastimes. And that was largely driven by the Goswamis, and after the Goswamis by three of our great acharyas, Srinivasacharya, Narottam Das Thakur, and Shyamananda Pandit. They brought the first wave of Mahaprabhu's movement. But that dwindled over the years after that, all the way down to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time. And then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he picked up the second wave. And Srila Prabhupada just is now taking that wave all the way through. So those are the two waves, Vishalini Mataji.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, Jyoti Mataji?
No, Prabhuji. Okay, considering that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the most recent incarnation of Krishna, and there are so many biographies of him, why is so little known about him outside ISKCON? Why is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu not worshipped in Hindu temples like Ram and Krishna?
That's a good question. I addressed part of that question in my presentation. I mentioned that most of these other biographies, they were written in the Sanskrit language. And the masses of people do not know the Sanskrit. And secondly, most of the Hindus, they were Mayavadis. Hinduism basically made impersonalism, Mayavadi philosophy. They would not feel inclined to read anything connected with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because they consider Chaitanya Mahaprabhu simply a saint who came in the Sampradaya as a sannyasi, but he was a deviant because he never followed the principles of Mayavadi sannyasi, which is austerities and studying Vedanta. He propagated the chanting. So they had no interest in the biographies of Mahaprabhu. That is one of the reasons. It was written in Sanskrit. It was not accessible. That language was not accessible. So therefore, most people didn't do. So there are two reasons why the Hindus do. Firstly, the leaders of the Hindus are practically Mayavadis. They won't recognize Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Neither would they. They see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a sentimental saint, not as a supreme personality of Godhead. So the leaders of the Hindus, they never shared Mahaprabhu's glories, and they because they never supported it. And therefore, the Hindus in general, they don't know about Mahaprabhu. Hope that answers your question, Mataji.
And Prabhuji, I think one last question.
So,
Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was empowered by Nityananda Prabhu. Do we need mercy of Guru to understand CC in its full spirit?
to understand anything in Krishna consciousness, we need the mercy of Guru. And in ISKCON, we have the preeminent Shiksha Guru, Srila Prabhupada. And then we have our contemporary gurus, our Diksha gurus. So certainly we need the mercy of Guru to understand Chaitanya Charitamrita. But Srila Prabhupada is so merciful. When, which we'll speak about this tomorrow, when he wanted to print Chaitanya Charitamrita, he said, print it for everyone. This book is for everyone. And Prabhupada said, whoever reads my book, they're already initiated. They're initiated by me. By dint of taking my books and submissively reading, they are considered to be initiated in one sense already, accepted by Srila Prabhupada. And yes, the spiritual master is the representative of Lord Nityananda. I hope that answers your question, Prabhu Mataji.
Thank you,
so much,
Prabhuji. That's
Prabhuji.
very clear.
Thank
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Krishna. Any other questions or comments?
Prabhuji, do you have time for one more?
Yes, Sailesh, we'll take one last one from you.
Last one, Prabhuji. The Pushti marks consider Vallabhacharya as Mahaprabhu.
Yes, Vallabhacharya, yes.
And it might be worthwhile because this is quite a misunderstood thing within the Gujarati community. If you could just clarify the relationship between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Vallabhacharya, because I think that's not really understood by many people. And there's a lot of confusion as to who Mahaprabhu is within the Pushti Margis who believe Vallabhacharya being Mahaprabhu.
Yeah, clearly in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is quite a lengthy conversation between Vallabhacharya and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in one sense, indirectly chastises Vallabhacharya for an understanding. And from Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is an authoritative biography, there's definitely no thought, no inclination of Vallabhacharya being Mahaprabhu himself. They may call him Mahaprabhu means the great Prabhu. So they may call him Mahaprabhu, but not in the context of being Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So there may be a misunderstanding there. They may be calling him Mahaprabhu just by being a great Prabhu, but not it being synonymous with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he is not Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He may be another person called Mahaprabhu, being given the title Mahaprabhu. Does that answer the point, Sailesh Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. I think the way I heard it from one of our ISKCON gurus was that the Lila between Mahaprabhu and Vallabhacharya was quite an intimate one. And actually, Vallabhacharya was a follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. At a later stage, after Vallabhacharya left, his followers started calling him Mahaprabhu because they wanted him to have a higher seat. So there was a kind of a offshoot. He wasn't a Vallabhacharya himself, considering himself Mahaprabhu, as it were, but because he was a follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But his followers eventually made him into Mahaprabhu because they were offended by the Leela between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu offending or calling Vallabhacharya a prostitute, and that sort of it was an intimate Leela between them. But I think that offended his followers, and they then started calling him Mahaprabhu. That's the way I heard it in the past. Maybe
yeah, there's more about it, and especially in terms of Sumati Moraji, and anyway, we can talk about it some other time. Yeah, but the gist of what you're saying is correct. Thank you for that.
Prabhu, is Vallabhacharya disciple of Gadadhar Pandit or Sri Gadadhar? Is it the same Vallabhacharya?
Well, it's a Vallabhacharya in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he's the Acharya of the Pushti Marg. That's
but
all
is it the same one? When I was reading that Vallabhacharya is disciple of Gadadhar Pandit.
Oh,
Might be the same, I don't know.
Yeah, if you have some references, we can look at it. Thank you. Okay, dear devotees, I've gone over time. I do apologize. I hope you found the session useful in both your understanding of Chaitanya Charitamrita. It was my hope by this book, by this session, you feel more inclined. Nowadays, this last few weeks, I've been trying to immerse myself in the subject matter. And yesterday, when I picked up Chaitanya Charitamrita, when I held it in my hand and when I opened it, I had a completely different feeling than I ever had before, just because of my immersement in it. And then I just wanted to embrace Chaitanya Charitamrita being such a great literature. So I hope you also felt a greater connection with Chaitanya Charitamrita through the session. If you do, we'll feel our efforts worthwhile. And hopefully it'll also help you to want to distribute Chaitanya Charitamrita. We're trying to do 300 sets, either by taking for yourself if you don't have, to sponsor or part sponsor if you have the means, and lastly, to tell your friends and family and your acquaintances if you don't. Yeah, okay, a little quickly. Chaitanya means life force, and Charitamrita means, Charit means character, Amrita means nectar. So Charitamrita means the nectar of the character of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was the life force of everyone. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Class.
Thank you.
Namo Namah. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hari Hari Bol.
Sumita